Misty, welcome to the podcast.
Hi. Thank you for
Hi,
having me.
thank you. And you were so patient. We had some technical issues on the startup of this meeting. Most of them were me, pre-coffee. So I'm ready now.
We're good now.
We're good now. It's all good. Everything happens for a reason. So, Misty, let me start us off by asking you about your skills and your background. You described yourself as a self-taught artist, so please talk about how you've developed your skills and your artistic style.
I was pretty artsy. I used to draw a lot when I was a little kid. And then I kind of listened to adult advice and grew out of that and went to a real career. And then I decided that that just wasn't working for me. So I picked up art again and I started I bought a couple of canvases one day and just kind of started playing with them and throwing paint on them and just kind of practicing with whatever I could get my hands on and everything. And then, developed into YouTube videos for techniques and taking some classes and things like that. And that's kind of where it all started. I got to the point where I knew creativity had to be part of my life again. So I went back in that direction.
I'm so glad you did. Yeah, and I think that that's where you're meant to be. And I think that happens with most artists. Funny enough, my listeners know I was raised by wolves. So both my parents are were entrepreneurs. And of course my dad, you know, followed his own advice, not, but he refused to work for anyone else ever. And so he always had his own business. But then when I was in college and I was a double major with science and art because I was interested in both, and he suddenly didn't like the idea that I wanted to become a full-time art student. And so when I finally, the art magnet pulled me in and I let him know that I
Mhm.
dropped my science major, he was so mad because he wanted me to get, a real job.
Yeah,
And I
exactly.
it's crazy. I think when artists don't listen to that creative voice when it's that strong for them, I think that they're really fighting against well, the energy of the universe. I think they're fighting
Yeah.
against what they're meant to be doing. And, once I switched over full time, I mean, I've never been, thank God, long-term struggling for any kind of employment or income. Most of my positions have come to me, even if it's through word of mouth, because I think it's the industry I'm meant to be in, and it just works.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, because when you listen to everybody else and kind of shut yourself out, it affects everything. Nothing works right.
Exactly, exactly. So I want to touch on all the facets of your business, beginning with the art itself. How do you come up with ideas for your art?
So everything's basically an inspiration. I'm a huge nature person. I love to hike and be outside and take photographs and everything. So, I mean, like this morning it's icy outside. So there's these puddles in our yard because we're doing construction and they're like covered in this really cool patterns and things. So I go out there and I photograph them and just the texture from outside on a leaf or the dirt or just, I mean, like I love texture. So anything like that, bright, beautiful colors in a flower. I mean, just everything, anything I see. Other people and their artwork, just, I mean, everything. Yeah.
So I think that that's the same case for a lot of us, that we get inspired by being really open and attentive to everything around us. It doesn't have to be super rigid of some kind of process. I think artists are innately curious. And I think when they give in to that curiosity and they really just pay attention to what's going on around them and ask themselves all kinds of questions. Oh, I wonder why that animal lives in that surrounding or whatever. I think when artists stay curious, that feeds that creativity. I'm convinced.
Yes. Yeah. It definitely helps. Yeah.
It definitely helps. I think that's really key. And I think it's also curiosity is key to being flexible, which helps with business. If you do want to be an artist who makes some form of business practice of your art, I think that staying curious helps you stay objective when things go wrong. I don't know if you've heard of the Stoics, but I practice Stoicism, and I think it's really important to that business practice for me is stepping back and saying, "Oh, that's interesting." My internet just
Right.
went down, or my computer audio won't work. And trying to go, "Huh, that's interesting." And so I think that's really important. I just read a book about the Stoics and their practice for life in general. And a lot of people think that Stoics are these like rigid, unfriendly, or unemotional people. But the philosophy is actually one of taking joy in just about any circumstance, even adversity, so that you can go, "Oh, that's cool. Okay, my website just went down." By the way, listeners, if you're listening to this, well, no, by the time you hear this, hopefully my website will be back up. But anyway, yeah, my website went down right after I moved it. Everything went smoothly, and all of a sudden the website went down, and then the podcast went down. So it's on Apple Podcasts and all the places where you can listen, but my actual Passionate Painter podcast website, at least as of this recording, which is November 16th, today the website is down. So I think it's important to not be reactive, but to be curious. And that's really important to go, huh, okay. And then you can regather your troops and go, who do I need to call? What questions do I need to ask? What problems do I need to resolve to get this moving in the right direction again? But reacting, and it's normal to be upset on some level when things don't go right, but reacting is definitely not going to help you. It's basically like panicking during an emergency, right?
Not good.
So, speaking of difficulties, what advice do you have for artists who are dealing with the fear of the blank page when they're creating their art?
So I actually get that a lot because a lot of people, especially in art journaling, people don't start because they're afraid to just get started and do something. So people tell me I'm fearless. I'm not sure that's the right word, but I have this thing where you just jump in. You're just gonna go do it. So the best way for me is I kind of cheat. That's how I actually started. I use old books or old magazines that already have something on them already. So it kind of is not really a blank page. And then you can incorporate your own stuff into it, which makes it really kind of fun because you're incorporating those pieces and photos and words that are already on that page into your artwork. If you don't want to start that way, a great way to do it is through collaging. You can just add some fun pages to that blank space that you really like. Or another good way is to just throw some paint on there. Use some ink or, your hands or anything you want and just kind of smudge some paint around and just kind of get it to not be blank. And then you don't even have to use it at the time. You could just start and then go to something else and come back to that piece later. It's not, just have some fun.
I love that. You've actually inspired me. Well, okay, so Misty has inspired me on so many levels since I discovered her website. And one of them was I completely renovated my office. I mean, not constructurally speaking. Is that a word? I cleaned it all out and I got rid of a bunch of stuff and I just rearranged all the furniture. So we'll be talking about that in a few minutes. But the other way is I had a bunch of books I was going to give to Goodwill, partly from the renovation, the clean out. And I went back and I saved them and I thought I can use these. And so I do the same thing in a sense. And this brought me to another practice of it with the more collaging and the used books is I'll take magazines and used newspapers and paste words into my sketchbooks randomly. And not always, as you mentioned, at the same time as you're going to be drawing on them or collaging or anything.
Yes.
But from time to time, if I'm watching TV or taking some relaxed time, just going through these things and looking at, without looking too long or prejudging why a certain word attracts you. If it's a weird word and suddenly you're worried about there's something wrong with you or, something going on in your life and you're like, oh, that's cool. And I just very quickly rip those pages out or just the words or the phrases. And then I'll recombine them kind of like you do when you're playing with your fridge magnet and you're making weird sentences. and I'll put them on sketchbook pages. And then I'll go back later, and instead of just saying, oh, I need to practice drawing eyes or hands or what have you, whatever is of my interest to just sketch as a technical practice, I will layer on top of that drawing. And so
Right.
what you said is exactly what works for me, at least with regard to the journaling sketchbook practice. And sometimes those lead to very interesting paintings. Those have led to some of my most successful paintings. Doing that kind of practice where all the pieces are,
Spontaneous.
yeah, spontaneous and feeding the concept of the other pieces so that yet again you're not starting with a blank mental page or a blank sketchbook page. So
Yeah.
you're right. And what
Little
you
prompts. They're fun. Yeah.
yes, yeah, and the play. You're thinking of it in a playful term, again back to the creativity and the curiosity feeding the creativity. So you're
Yep.
definitely really on target with all of what you're doing. So speaking of what you're doing, your
Mhm.
website offers workshops, retreats, and artwork for sale. Tell me how you created this kaleidoscope business from your art. How did this all come to be?
So it first started with me just getting back into creativity and playing and doing other stuff. And then of course, I'm really big on sharing artwork. I don't, this is probably going to offend some people, but I don't think artwork is meant just for you. I mean, some of it, obviously, if you are journaling, you keep it to yourself, it's personal. But I think art is meant to be kind of shared with the rest of the world. It's meant to inspire people and, share your world with other people and see their world and their perspective and everything. So I tend to share a lot of my stuff, not even, even if it's not good. It's just, you put it out there and you share it with people. And a lot of people really loved the artwork and what I was doing and how I was doing it. So from there, it kind of grew into teaching people. I started teaching with Michael's Arts and Crafts years ago. I was a scrapbook instructor. So, we were creating memories around pictures that people took because I was a photographer too, as well. So it kind of grew from there. And I realized that I loved sharing inspiration and teaching other people. So it developed into workshops. And then I came to find out that, a lot of people were doing art retreats, and it sounded just amazing to me to just go away for, a few days or a week with some amazing women and just have some fun and play with some art and make new friends. And so that's kind of where that side of it came from. It kind of went from just sharing artwork to instructing to let's go have some fun and teach and play and everything else at the same time. So it was a little bit of a progression, but it was fun to watch it develop.
So how did you start doing the retreats themselves on your own outside of Michael's? Did you advertise them through your website or through social or?
I advertise them through my website. I do them through social as well when I actually do them, and I do a lot of word of mouth. A lot of the people that follow, my artwork or my workshops or friends will start talking about them. It's kind of funny, but my mom is like my biggest cheerleader. She tells everybody about everything that I do. So, that kind of helps a lot and everything. So, um, you know,
Sometimes.
yeah, yeah, it's sometimes it's like shh, too much, but it's a great way to, get the word out with people that I'm not actually interacting with. So it's kind of great, but yeah, social
Excellent.
media is a big one, the website. So
Now, are these virtual retreats or do people come to your studio?
so most of the time the retreat actually happens at a different location. Like sometimes there'll be one at the coast down in Oregon, or I'm looking into doing some in California, possibly Washington. So it would be like a B&B or some cute little, something like that, a hotel. And then you go and you just have this week-long thing. I don't have an actual space set up yet here because I'm still rebuilding, but eventually the workshops will take place downstairs below me in my little workshop, but the retreats are usually somewhere else.
So, as far as the logistics of setting up these retreats, do you just set them up on your website through the shopping cart as an item, just as far as getting sales and having people buy would it be like tickets, reservations, registering? How do you go about the
Yes.
mechanics of making something like that happen?
So there's an actual retreat page for each specific retreat. So depending on, what you're really looking for, 3 days, 7 days, mixed media, art journaling, depending on what the actual retreat is. And then it runs you through basically where it is, what time it is, what we'll be doing and everything. And then it'll give you options for, like single rooms, or if you want to share a room with someone or something like that. And then that particular accommodation is what you actually would click on and pay for as an item, and that reserves your spot for the retreat. And it's through the website.
And so did you have to use special integration software for that? Um, or like event software, and or do you just take it as an item on your website and then you pay the vendor, like if it's a bed and breakfast? I assume they'll have options such as, like you said, room sharing and maybe group meals or things like that.
Yeah, so basically what it is you incorporate all those costs and I add them into the accommodation fee, and then they just book the room through the actual website, and then I pay the vendor.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering
Yeah.
because this is a wonderful option for people to pursue as artists, as far as a lot of people
Mm-hmm.
do on, like I do online teaching, or they do workshops physically in person. And I don't talk to a lot of workshop people. And so this is a very interesting iteration of being able to
Right.
monetize your art or your skill in teaching and motivating people. And it's really kind of an alignment with coaching. This is very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of nice because like workshops are pretty local. I mean, unless you're doing online, but most of the time when you're doing in-person ones, they're very local. So a retreat kind of lets you reach out to a bigger audience, because they can come from afar and they can kind of take a vacation while they're doing their retreat and learning and meeting new people and stuff like that. So it's a lot. It's pretty complicated to run one. There's a lot of behind the scenes stuff, but it's fun, and you make great connections that way and everything. So it's
It is.
wonderful for anyone who's doing art to step into.
And tell the listeners where you physically are.
I am currently in Oregon. I moved down here a few years ago from Washington, so that's where I was actually running my business. But currently, we are based in Oregon, and that's where most of the retreats take place at the moment. So
And is there less rain in Oregon from Washington?
a little bit.
It's beautiful
Fall
though.
is, yeah, yeah. Fall is very rainy here, but it's a gorgeous state as well. There's some beautiful things here.
It is. I miss the Northwest Coast and California. So,
Yeah.
what company are you using for your art website?
So currently, my entire website and my storefront and my shopping all runs off of Squarespace.
Okay.
I was on Wix for a long time, and then they made it where I couldn't schedule my blogging, which drove me crazy. So I switched over. I switched the entire website over to Squarespace, and they kind of have, everything where you can integrate it. You just pay for upgrades and everything. But they run a shop through there, which is really nice because it's all in one location. So I can just run it straight through there. I don't have to do Shopify or anything else on top of that.
So you're using Squarespace,
Yes.
and you said that they can handle all of the shopping carts and all the taxes and all the things.
Yep.
Excellent. And when I note to listeners, when I say what art storefront website are you using, I don't mean the business called Art Storefronts necessarily, although that's the one I just switched to. So I'm curious what other artists are using and what they find works for them.
Mm-hmm.
So this website also allows you to sell your work,
Yes.
and it allows you to sell prints of your work and originals, right?
Yes.
And to allow you to
Yeah.
do
The
Tell me.
the shop, you can pretty much add anything you want to it. Like it gives you an option for a bunch of categories. You can add as many as you want, and then you can just add, specific art prints to it, or your category has originals in it and things like that. So, and you can put a lot of pictures with it, which is really nice. The storefront is a little hard because the main one, when people go into it, it has everything, mixed together in it. So it's really good to have categories, but I might consider moving over to something else that's a little more not so mushed together,
Yeah.
just to make it a little less complicated for people, but I haven't got to that point yet. So
I understand. So, okay. Yeah. And I get that for being able to sort what you're looking for. My art storefronts website, I can say everything went well switching over because I didn't have an official shopping cart system before that I didn't put in myself. So I like the
mhm.
way that they allow you to segment things. The one thing that I struggled with that company, I told my listeners I would get back to them about how that all went. And it just launched. So the one thing that threw me, and for people like you and I who already have a blog or a podcast, they were not
Mhm.
able to keep my podcast links the same as they were. So,
Oh,
yeah, and that actually was a big deal to me. So, we went back and forth over that for quite some time because I like to tell my listeners, this is episode 102, right? So to see Misty Gage, check out her work at passionatepainterpodcast.com/episode 102 so that it can be
mhm.
domain name/episode number. And that's very important to me because, our people are driving or they're in the middle of a hot yoga pose. God knows what they're doing. It's easier to remember. It's just podcast name
Right.
slash episode followed by a numeric number. And they couldn't do that. And so when I got on there, I'm like, okay, everything's up, everything's running. It happened so fast. Yay. And then I looked and I'm like, that's not going to work because I can't tell them /podcast/blog_post. It got complicated. And I go, you got to remove this folder. Just take the files
Mhm.
and move them out of the folder so that the path is the same. And they go, yeah, we can't do that. So that became, for me, not a deal breaker with the website. I like the website. I love the options. It's not terribly difficult to work with. I wouldn't say it's a piece of cake for somebody who doesn't have web experience, but for me, it's great, except this was a big deal for me. The inability to fix those links to be the same as they were for someone who already has a podcast, already has a blog where people know where to find it. That's a
Mhm.
bigger deal than it sounds because it's for the ease of the listener, it's for the ease of the visitor. So I have to consider them in a
Yep.
decision like that. But overall,
Yep.
yeah, I like it. For somebody with experience like you and I, as far as the web end, I'm happy with all the pieces. So we'll have to see how the year goes regarding sales and my ability to generate some kind of movement selling my art. I will keep you guys, my listeners, posted on how that goes. A lot of that is going to be up to me and how well I promote my work, which will tie into my next questions with Misty about promoting your art. So, before we do that, I want to ask about pricing. When you deal with promoting your artwork, how do you figure out your pricing?
So currently what I use is the linear inch, so 5 by 7, and then I times that by 2 because right this second I don't really make big pieces. So I want to keep the price, not in the thousands of dollars. I want it to be reasonable for people. So I times it by $2 per linear inch and everything. And then my prints, I do about half of that for the normal standard size that the original is, and then I go up by about $10 for each size after that until I get into the big ones, and then it's a lot more than that. I haven't started selling anything above an 11 by 14
Okay.
because when I was doing I did a lot of markets and things when I first started, and everybody I talked to were like, we love your pieces, but they're so big. I have no space for everything. So several years ago, I kind of went down to smaller ones so that people could have the space for them or they could put them on their desk and stuff. So I don't do big ones. So right now, the linear inch is actually working out really well for me because they're tiny pieces.
I've done the linear inch thing too, and I've been in debates with other artists about linear versus square inch. And for
Mm-hmm.
me, the linear inch worked well in that it didn't have the seemingly large jumps between sizes and pricing.
Yes.
Because if you do square inches, you might have what would appear to be a bit of a abrupt jump between, say, a 10 by 12 and an 11 by 14, where you go, oh, why is that one so
Yes.
much more? So it's more of a smooth parabola, where your pricing's going up gradually. Also, your site now, the way that you have arranged, does it accommodate if people want to do matting and framing?
I haven't really played with that option on there yet. It does have options to give you, like, it gives you a drop down menu for sizings and things. So more than likely I could update it, with a frame, with matting, so it probably gives me the option on there. I haven't really got in there and looked yet. Hopefully it will let me do that on that website as well.
Do they ship it to a vend? Does a vendor jump in at that point, or do they ship the print to you and you have to deal with it?
So I actually do all the prints and everything. I ordered them from a company in Florida right this second, and I'm actually looking at getting another one through a company up in Kent, Washington, just because it's a little bit closer for certain sizes. They don't do all the sizes that I use. So I'm looking at that one, but I typically get all the prints and then I add, some personal hand touches to them and everything. I don't really like that print on demand thing where somebody else is responsible for the quality and I don't get to check it and make sure it looks good and add my own things to it. So right now I do all the prints.
That's good. It's good to know because there's different arrangements that you can do with all this stuff. And I think, those listening need to know their options. I, for instance, am doing the other way, where the reason I picked the site I picked is because it has all that built in. And so there's like matting and framing options, and there's pluses and minuses to those things. I didn't feel like I was ready to do it your way, and I think some people feel the opposite. Because for me, I was afraid if I ordered like the limited editions, right? Somebody does that, it comes back to me like you're doing, which is a very special thing in that you're adding touches, you're going back in, making it special. I was afraid I would spill my coffee on it. I'm like, if this is paid for now, how reliable I am with a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
So,
Life happens.
yeah. So for me, I just felt like I can't handle that right now. So it's just open edition prints. People can have them. It goes to the vendor ships, they bill me for the overhead, and then the difference would be whatever I would come out with. But I think it's interesting to know all these different ways you can do it. You can have everything sent to you and individually manage your vendors like you're doing, check the quality in person, and there's benefits to that. You can do it the way I'm doing it, where the company takes care of everything, unless it's a special edition, where then it does come back to you. So these are all things that listeners, if you're thinking about going to a business level website for your art, to consider. Where are my comfort levels? Which way is going to be less complicated for me, depending on who I use as the company that I'm paying to handle the website, or if I'm doing it myself. And most importantly, I think, is where does my stress level sit with that? Am I going to be worried about having a high quality print shipped to me and then have to worry about my coffee? So I think that these are all really valuable considerations to get our listeners to that point of considering what points to think about, because you and I have been down those roads already ahead of them and can go, okay, don't forget to ask about this or that thing, so that you're not like, oh, I didn't think of that. Now I have to deal with this complication.
It's a very personal thing how you actually, like, because I've considered doing the someone else printing and sending and all of that stuff. And it'd be great logistic wise because I wouldn't have to sit there and be involved in every single one,
Yes.
But I just haven't made it to that point yet because I don't know, maybe I'm a control freak, but the quality control is just like, I can't let go of it yet. One day maybe, but
I get it.
I just can't yet.
Yep. For me right now with my day gig, it's necessary because I want to maintain the podcast on the weekends and I need time to paint. And then, naturally my family wants to see me, it's a juggle. It's always a juggle no matter what you're doing. So turning back to the promotion concept, of course, when you're putting your art on a website or promoting it in any fashion, there's the issue of taking photographs of it, especially if it's for prints. What's the biggest mistake artists make when photographing their art?
So bad lighting is a really big one. A lot of people will just whip out their cell phone and not really think about things like distortion or anything like that. So, you just want to be really careful with those. And a lot of people will also not tell a story when they're taking a picture. They just snap a picture of their artwork, which you want. You want a picture of just your artwork, but you also want to incorporate some style and some storytelling that's going to really like sell the artwork print. I mean, you can use websites and apps where you can, crop it into a picture, like a stock photo or something like that. But it's really nice to add your own personal touches and stuff. So lighting is a big one though. That's like the number one big one.
I think lighting is the biggest problem too. I just encountered this with the new website because I'm photographing for prints. And I was looking at buying a camera. I was considering buying an actual dedicated, like a Canon, we use at work I use a Rebel, and I love the Canon Rebel. But my girlfriend came over with her Canon and we looked at different options for taking photos, and I was surprised slash happy slash horrified to realize that my iPhone took better pictures than her camera did, which blew my mind. It's an iPhone 15 Pro, so it is new, and I bought the upgrade because I knew I'd be photographing art. So it wasn't cheap, relatively speaking. It's more probably expensive than the Canon, but it's, everybody has the phone contract and the thing, and you've also got your phone that you're using with it. But I didn't know, and Art Storefronts, to their credit, walked me through how to set it for megapixels. And so you can go into your settings on your iPhone and set it. They require a minimum of 24 megapixels per photograph. And I think the default is 12, and it's a very high quality, but I thought they were great. And then they're like, they're too small. So I now have my phone set to 24 megapixels, but you can click the little info inside the circle icon when you take a photo to just check that it took it at the higher megapixel if you need it to do reproductions. Also, my struggle with the iPhone is the distortion, because as you know, if it's not exactly straight on, parallel from top to bottom, left to right with the painting, if it's a painting or the artwork in any fashion, it can do that kind of lens distort. I try to minimize that, but I straighten everything out in Photoshop, but I have the access to the Adobe stuff because I have all of that at home. So for my business, so I have access and knowledge about fixing those things, but it's another step. So that is a frustration that you don't always have as much with, say, a dedicated camera. How do you recommend getting around the lighting? Do you do the whole lay it down on the floor in a doorway with natural light coming in? Because I'm also struggling with looking for locations in my house with proper daylight, because I took them outside like Google will tell you to do, and it was way too bright and washing them out.
Yeah. The best place I have found is to do it inside where there's a lot of natural light, but you're not getting it directly on the artwork. So you can actually like put it up on a wall if you have a better wall that gets direct sunlight than if you have like a floor spot. You want to just make sure it's, pretty straight wherever you're trying to put it, whether it's on the floor or not, and direct lighting. There's also a hack you can do. If you have to use, house lighting and stuff that's not natural, you put your piece in the middle, and then you kind of have your camera right here looking at it, and then you have two lights right here. So it kind of creates a really nice look to it without getting shadows or things, Some artwork, obviously, if you've got a lot of texture, you want a little bit of shadowing and stuff on it, but most people don't. They really want that straight on, no shadow effect for reproductions and stuff like that. So natural light is always best, but don't go outside. If you're going to go outside, cloudy days, because it diffuses the light for you. That's actually the best thing for it. So.
Amen. I learned that the hard way because my poor husband was carrying paintings inside and outside, and I'd be like, oh, this didn't work. We got to do it again. He's like, oh. So I learned they were all too washed out, all of them. I'm like, we can't use anything. Yes. So I've left him out of the process now because he's really nice and I like him. So thank you. Yeah, I am still working that out. I'm thinking about actually making a photography booth in my studio with the correct CR readings for the light. So it's, get the daylight bulbs and the 45-degree angles. And I may very well do that because it is such a big part of selling my art online now. So thank you. That is really important. And Misty
Yeah.
has an article on this subject on her blog as well. We will link to that. And whatever
Yeah,
important links you feel that you're touching upon through the conversation, please send me a text and I will incorporate those into the show notes.
of course. Yeah.
Because this way our listeners can just go click and enjoy all the benefits of
Right.
our explorations and lessons that we've had to learn.
Right. If we can
Yeah,
share so it saves people time, then great. I'm all about doing that. So,
that's why
yeah.
we're here. So, how do you grow your audience? Tell me this.
So word of mouth is a really big one. I share my art with pretty much anyone who will look at it. I do marketing and I talk to people. I still work part-time at Michael's, so I can get discounts and stuff on
Oh,
products, which is great. Anyways, so I talk to a lot of people. I'm one of the framers there, so we talk a lot of art. So I see it, I share it, I talk with people. I also do a lot of posting across social media. I have a YouTube channel so that you can actually watch me create things and see how I do it. Facebook has always been a big one for me. A lot of my following is on Facebook. And then I just recently, within the last couple of years, started both a Pinterest page and a Instagram because those are really big for artists. They're very visual and everything. So I'm working really hard to get continuous content on there and the right kind of content and everything like that. And I also just recently started an email list a couple years ago. It's probably my hardest one. I know that everybody's like, you've really got to do it. It's really important, but it's so hard. I don't like cold calling or anything like that. So I'm trying to work out how to do the email lists
I
less
agree.
aggressively.
I agree. And that was always my hardest too. Again, my website's been in flux and now I'm returning to really doing more emails. My listeners don't often hear from me via email because they hear from me via podcast. I do give them access to a bonus vault when they sign up for my list because it's all the things that I've developed over the years that we talk about on the show and like checklists and cheat sheets and things. And I want to share those things. Those are also things that my students get. So it's good to sign up for that list. I have not really, I tend to synonymize sending an email with bugging them, which isn't always true, but I think it's important to stay connected. So I think you and I need to, and our listeners probably too, if they want to do email lists, learn to reframe that in terms of connecting because we're connectors and we love to be like with our people.
Yes.
And so I think taking the things that you're doing on social, even if you have, say, an embed code for a video that you've done and popping it, take something, okay. So I'm going to say for both of us, our homework is to think about the email list in terms of the blank page syndrome. Take something you've already done,
Mm-hmm.
take some wisdom from someone else that you give them credit for naturally, share something you've learned from that info or something that you already produced on social, and then expound on it a little bit and say, hey, here's a video of me creating this or that, and use what you have already as a starting point. And I think you and I are going to get a lot better at that if we take
Mm-hmm.
the same concept in our minds.
Yeah, I recently had someone because I was talking to a marketing coach a couple of years ago when she really got me started in this. And she actually, because email marketing is her big thing. So of course she was asking, do you do it? And I'm like, So she was like, you have to, and I'm like, I don't like selling. Selling is just cringy and it's awful and I don't like it. So she's like, you have to stop thinking about email lists as selling and think of them as sharing. So now I shifted to more of a sharing mindset, which makes it a lot easier because you're just sharing relevant service information that people might need one day or really like, whether it's actually, a product or a class. You share it with them, just giving them information instead of selling stuff to them.
I agree with you. I think that's a really good outlook for it. And I always struggle with the sales aspect as well. I'm an introvert. My mom refuses to believe that because I have a podcast, but I like the one-on-one connection. I like the intimacy of talking to one friend at a time or small groups. When we talk about introvert versus extrovert, neither is better, but personality wise, the best explanation I've heard of it that makes sense to me is when you need to recharge, say after a long week at work, an extrovert wants to go to a party and be in that big group vibe, and an introvert
Mm-hmm.
might want to go and have coffee with a close friend and curl up with a book afterwards, something like that. And I'm more of that. I'm going to go to my cave now with a fire, sit by the fireside and read my book and talk to my
Me too.
husband, or have dinner with my closest friends. I'm not going to go to a rave and throw myself in a mosh pit because, first of all, it's dangerous. And second of
No.
all, it's just not my personality. I love humans. I love you guys, but I'm not a big crowd person. So
Mm-hmm.
I think this is great advice. And if those of us who consider ourselves introverts can reframe the terrifying concept of selling into being of service with our knowledge and our experience, it's a whole different ballgame. And I found that throughout my career. I love to teach art. I love anything I'm doing that I love. It relates to connecting to other people. So you are a servant creator in that way. You love to share your knowledge. You love to help people. I love to help people. If we remember we can connect with our people this way, I think it's going to take a lot of the sting out of the concept of selling.
It's a good thought to think of it kind of as a sharing a story or just connecting with a friend, not some stranger, not some, don't think of your email list as a bunch of strangers. Think
Right.
of them as your friends and write to one very specific person. I heard that a long time ago from somebody, I don't even know. And it stuck with me. So I try to, write to one person and friendly, not silly.
It's huge. And I actually have a sock monkey, and I love my sock monkey. You can put the sock monkey on the shelf and talk to the sock monkey. This is your friend.
Yeah.
This is somebody you're talking to, one entity. I mean, a marketer. God bless us all. I'm a marketer too. They will call it your ideal customer avatar. Now, that ideal customer is going to change if you're talking to an artist and you're selling a workshop or a
Mhm.
retreat versus talking to a buyer of your art. Because artists, by and large, we're all singing for our supper. We're probably not going to buy from each other. We'd love to, but let's be honest, most of the time it's trade. I'll paint your portrait if you give me that gorgeous landscape. So I think it's important to keep that fact in mind. I also think if you're talking to your audience of buyers, it's important. What you said is critical, the story aspect. Tell that story as a service to your buyer because it can heal them and it can connect with them and make them feel nostalgia for something that means something to them. They can feel heard and they can look at that piece and really feel healing. I sold a piece in California that I absolutely was attached to, but I didn't want to take it across country. And it had a story. And in fact, it had been stolen. So at one point, and I hired a private eye to recover it. It was hysterical. But when artists' work is stolen, a lot of times their first thing is, oh no. But they say that the best thing to do when it's stolen is say, oh, thank God. Apparently that's what Picasso said when his first work was stolen. Not that I'm Picasso, I'm not. But that's
Somebody
what
loved it enough to take it.
yeah, he goes, oh, thank God. So when it was stolen, I went, oh, thank God, which it goes back to the stoic, let's frame this in a positive light, right? So there was that. And then there was the story of the piece itself. It was a skeletal sculpture of a woman. I know I've talked about this before on the show, but I made this a long time ago. I welded it and I told the story. It's called Echo because I believe it was penance because she ticked off the hunter goddess. And so she ended up falling in love with this guy who was staring at his own reflection and he couldn't see her. He was not paying attention to her. And so she eventually faded away until all she had left of her was her echo. And so I told this story,
Oh.
and I think I mentioned too about the whole stealing thing because it's funny. But there's two stories there, right? So I'm at a garden party where they were selling art, and I told the story to a potential buyer about a woman who could only love a man who loved himself. And she looks at me and her eyes get really big and she runs away. And I go, oh crap,
no.
there goes a sale, right? I'm like, oh, well, I guess that didn't work. Next thing I know, she comes back to me dragging this man who's like oh no, he has a look like somebody just slapped his mama. And he comes up and she goes, tell him a story, tell him a story. And I'm like, okay. And I told him a story and they pulled out their checkbook.
Oh,
And
wow.
I was like,
Yeah.
that's great. I don't have to carry that across country, because honestly, it was a little sharp and a little dangerous. But this sold the piece. It was like the difference between her going, oh, that's interesting, and like a sale. So
Yes.
that applies to whichever avatar you're talking to, whichever potential audience you have.
Mhm.
So I only have a couple more questions. I know I'm keeping you a little over today because I'm so happy to talk to you. Let's talk about the benefits of decluttering your art space, because that was the other way that you inspired me. I got into your information and I went, okay, after grad school, I have a disaster of a studio. I hadn't touched it. I mean, if I wasn't doing schoolwork last year, I was sleeping. It was a choice between cleaning and sleeping. It was a rough year.
Sleeping.
So it got me off of center, and I pulled all my studio apart and I reorganized it, and I'm so happy I did. Tell us all about this magic.
So a lot of us have life happen and things just pile up and get everywhere, and that's just how it happens. But you can start to feel it, like your creativity gets stagnant or it pauses, or you just feel like a tension when you go in your room. So it's really good to just kind of stop and breathe for a second, and then you look around and you can see kind of why. So it's a good idea because, first of all, it will relieve a lot of stress. Just having a nice organized space, you're not running around looking for, that thing that you love, you can't find it. It's just more organized. It's a lot less stressful for you. It also will actually let your creativity flow better, because you don't have to, stop and spend all that time looking for that thing. You don't have to stress out about, I have to move this over here to get in here and I don't have the space. And so those are the two big ones. A lot less stress and creative flow are a lot better in a space that feels welcoming. It's also a good idea to organize because it just boosts your happiness, which is obviously going to help you create better and everything as well. So, yeah.
Do you have tips on how to go about this? People will say, well, I know I need to clean it up, but where do I start? I mean, I'm not a big advocate of buying containers just for the sake of them. I love containers and boxes, just so you guys know. But, you can spend a lot of money on all kinds of support products and then still have an issue. So, do you have wisdom on that subject of how to get this all going and open up the space? I agree. When your creativity is expansive, stress and clutter can be contractive.
Yeah.
And when you contract, that's when the creativity shuts down. So tell me how you expand into your space.
So the first thing that I always recommend to anyone who's going to do it is to actually get rid of everything. If you have the space and the ability to move everything out, remove it all. Because what that does is it actually gives you a brand new blank canvas. So you're not stuck in, oh, but I think I really like this piece here, or maybe it'll work better here. You just see the whole room as a brand new space, and you can just start over and do what kind of feels more natural in this space, instead of kind of going, well, this works, but it kind, you clear your whole space out. So I would recommend that. I also am a big fan of upcycling. I don't typically buy a lot of stuff because I don't like spending them on things like that. So, use some really nice boxes, like a photo box or something that you might already have, and then decoupage it to match your style. You can use tin cans and decorate them as well and use them in there, and, kind of simplify. You don't have to buy all the latest, greatest things to make your space personal and you. So, like I said, start with taking everything out, find stuff that you already have to incorporate it in there and use that in your space. And then the last thing would be to pretty much get rid of anything that doesn't make you super, super happy. Like if you look at this thing and you're just not like, I'm in love with this, get rid of it. unless it's really serving like an actual purpose. It's a lot of clutter and it doesn't really need to be there. It's not inspiring you. So just donate it, reuse it for something else. Those are my biggest ones.
I completely agree with what you're saying. And I have found that one thing in particular, when you're talking about, it sounds like you maybe into Marie Kondo, kind of like I am, um, about taking stuff out.
Yes.
And also, I'm a big fan of Dana White, who is the author of Decluttering at the Speed of Life. That's one of her books. She is the host of the Slob Comes Clean podcast. And she talks about a lot of things, ways to clean and declutter for people that aren't obsessed with cleaning and decluttering. So that's helpful. A couple of things she says. One of them is artists tend to look at decluttering and cleaning in terms of projects because most of our creations are projects. And so they think of it as this big, epic thing that they don't have energy for. Whereas if they just break it down into this is a habit, it's a lot easier to maintain. And so she will say, if you are stuck, go do your dishes. But it puts you in that mind frame of this is a repetitive process that is valid unto itself. And for us, we know that creates less stress because now you're smoothing out your visual environment. Doing the dishes does the same thing and it reduces clutter in the kitchen. And so she'll say one thing leads to another thing. I highly recommend Dana's stuff and Marie Kondo for those of you who, like Misty and I, happen to really enjoy the whole decluttering cleaning thing. Marie Kondo is amazing. And I'll put some links to those things in the show notes. The other thing that Dana says, when rooms get cluttered, many times it's because it's being multi-purposed. Now, I hadn't really thought of that before because as an artist, I was always trying to make a little space for myself in the corner so I could paint and saying, oh, I'm sorry, I'm just going to paint over here. First of all, stop apologizing and stop worrying about taking up space. Y'all need to take up your space. Brene Brown calls this standing in your sacred space. I'll link to her too. She's a genius. To be creative, it's expansive. We need to just take up our space and call it good. Okay.
Yes.
Please, God, take up your space. You are worth it. I love you. Just take it up. So that means claiming your space, which ergo means saying to family members at times, I'm so sorry, honey, but this is my space. And this is not a dumping ground for family mail, filing. I don't know about you, but I realized that an entire wall with a table and piles of my studio was a year's worth of unresolved filing because of grad school. I hadn't been processing the mail and I just was trying to make everything, I was trying to not be a problem because we were all working around this crazy grad school all year and it was quite a ride. And I felt very apologetic about, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm making everybody, deal with this and we're living out of laundry baskets, so yeah. I went, you know what? The filing is not just my issue. It's family filing. And when somebody goes, oh, where's that piece of paper? It doesn't belong in my studio. I know I'm the mom, but it doesn't mean it's art. So I moved it into the den. So God bless us all, but now the den has the filing cabinet in it. And the reason for that is it works for our life. It works for if you want me to do the filing, which nobody ever asked me to do, but I'm the only one who's going to do it. So it's that or it's going to get even worse. It needs to work for me, the person who's doing it, and I need to have a system. What that means is that table, that 6-foot table with all the filing boxes went into the den. I will get to the bottom of it to a point where I can actually maintain it without having piles, but it's going to get ugly before it gets better because it's been sitting for a year. So that's a discussion to have with your family, a comfort level issue where you go, I will take care of this. I am willing to do this, but we're all going to have to be patient while I dig to the bottom of it, unless somebody's going to help me. So it's important to work with what works for your comfort and your stress level because you are creative and you need to cultivate environments and practices that support you and your creativity because you're worth it.
Taking it in little steps. Yeah. I mean, don't look at it as a whole, if you can't move everything out, tackle this table, today. tomorrow tackle this one, and then set up daily habits where I'm not just going to throw everything down and leave it for the next day. You know, you kind of clean up afterwards and stuff. It kind of helps you, like you said, get in a habit so that you're not doing it all at one big massive thing, or it doesn't turn into a year-long project where at the end you have to clean it all up and figure out what you're doing. So
yes, normally I don't let it get to that, because this is a lot now. But, and I understand what you're saying about taking everything out of the room. To be honest,
sometimes that doesn't work.
Sometimes it can't. It depends. Especially like if you're looking down the barrel of Thanksgiving. I said to my husband, I want to rearrange the studio, and I need all this to be moved into the den. And he looked at me like, you've got to be kidding me. Like that there's no time for this. And I go, you know what? I just need to turn like this console and this storage unit against a different wall, and that will unlock my space. So sometimes there's a different layout, not to change for the sake of it, but that will unlock your space. And it allowed it allowed the open space to go from more of a narrow arrangement to more of a squarish arrangement, kind of that 16 by 9 pleasing space that we all see on like Facebook, the rectangle. And so a friend came over, and she goes, okay, like she just is into basically flipping houses. God bless her. Thank you, Nicole. I love you. So she goes, what do you want to do? And I go, well, I need to move this. I want to move the sound booth. Let's see if I can show you all this. The people that listen to this particular episode will get the benefit of knowing that what you see behind you is actually my sound booth. So this is a green screen. Why? Because that's the best way I can get, so you wouldn't see all the detail you would see out that window necessarily on a real background. It is right next to me, but it's a green screen. So at the moment, hold on a second. There you go.
Aha!
Ta-da! It's back. But this is the best way to do it. And so, because that is my studio, and it's 6 feet away from me is that window, well, the one right behind me. But I do re-record seasonal shots of what's going on outside so it can be relevant. But I rearranged everything, and it made such a difference. It did involve, the big moving out thing was moving the blockage, I'm going to call it, which is what you said. Get rid of, for me, it wasn't everything, but when I removed that table, it was a big blockage. So it for me was everything that was the problem. I moved out the table. All the boxes that were around the table didn't belong in the room. They were filing. Then I felt I could deal with what was left and get to access the shelves and the books and the other things, because it wasn't possible from a practical standpoint to take everything out, because my poor husband would have completely imploded. But it allowed me.
We don't want that.
No, it allowed me to actually make huge progress. So you're correct. When you can, remove everything. When you can't, see if there's a block or something you can take out to make your life much better and get you off of stuck. And I think all these things and all of your teachings and your practices are really helpful and motivating. And they've helped me already so much just to get that boost. And I'm going to put all the contact information for Misty on the show notes for you guys. Misty, I love to give my guests the last word. Thank you so very much for giving me your time today. I know we've gone over. I would love for you to wrap us up with your best advice for taking your art practice to the next level. Something you wish maybe you did differently or sooner back in your early days. What would you like to share with our audience?
So my best advice is, it's really simple and you're going to laugh, but it's just do it. I'm a very shy introvert, so for a long time, years, I held myself back, just being afraid. So my best advice is, whether you're afraid or not, just put yourself out there, go do it. You have great, big, beautiful dreams. Just chase them down and keep following them, and just go do it. Fear or not, just do it anyways.